I'm Sasha Nicole.
And I'm Star.
And I'm Dr. T.
And this is Amerikan Therapy, the definitive podcast on all things Black mental health. And of course, we are back in our virtual studio. And we're excited today. Star, what's going on today?
All right, today we are talking all things the importance of estate planning, life insurance, and basically just having your affairs in order, because just like we all have an entrance date, we all have an exit date. So let's get to it.
Absolutely. So our first guest today, we have Miss Vanessa Lindley. She ran a State Farm agency for 3 years in Chevy Chase, Maryland. She's licensed in life, health, property, and casualty in Series 6. She won top life insurance sales awards and trips around the country, including in Hawaii. Prior to that, she was a part of agency management, where she helped insurance agents build their businesses and reach their life insurance sales goals through staff training and technology. She has also been on a mission for the past 15 years to educate and inspire people to obtain financial stability and create generational wealth. She has her own consulting now called Lindley Consulting Group. So you can reach her there, and we'll post all that. And then we also have attorney Ashley Steps. Ashley was born and raised in the Arkansas Delta and Pine Bluff, and she's a graduate of Delaware State University and received her law degree from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Formerly with the Raymond B. Harvey Law Firm, Ashley's career has spent serving elderly and special needs clients, their families, loved ones, as they encounter legal issues that accompany aging and disability. She works to assist her clients in making sure that intricate legal areas of elder law. As well as being a frequent National Business Institute speaker, she has written, planned, and presented programs on various elder law subjects for several professionals, and her writings on pet trusts have been published by Outskirts Press. She's also a Veterans Administration accredited attorney. So, welcome, you guys. We're so excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here.
How y'all doing? Yeah, we're excited because, a lot of us, we always make that joke when, as Star mentioned, the exit, we all have the exit. And when people exit, we often see popping up on social media the GoFundMes and, whatever other form of GoFundMes that are out there now to help people pay for funeral expenses as well as just living expenses after their loved one has exited. And then, we kind of always like, well, gee, nobody had life insurance. But what we find in our community is that a lot of us don't have life insurance, or we just have life insurance through our job, let alone have even thought about estate planning. So, Ashley, I'll start with you from an estate standpoint, because at least for me, I'll speak from my perspective. I feel like if I don't have, I don't feel that way now, but I did. I want to be clear. But I have often felt like if I don't have a lot of things to leave, then what is the point of having like an estate? Like when I think of estate planning, I think of someone who has multiple properties and this and that. So it's like, can you speak to that and why it is important that no matter what you have or where you are in life, why estate planning is important?
Absolutely. One of my mentors, her favorite thing to say with new clients was, if you have $1 and 2 family members, you need an estate plan. And I just always thought it was hilarious. It's like, $1? She's like, yeah, people will fight over anything. And she did say, work a little longer and you'll see I'm telling the truth. And the very next day, case came in, $1 million estate. Lots of money, lots of cash, lots of property. The kids were not fighting over the cash. It was an unequal distribution, meaning, some kids got more than others. Nobody was fighting over that. They were fighting over Barca loungers. What's a Barca? A lazy boy, a recliner. This is millions of dollars. I'm sitting here like, the oldest child, got, $2,000. I'm sitting over here pissed because, like, you only get $2,000 and you over here fighting over 2 chairs saying, no, mom and dad were together 60 years. We can't separate the chairs. Are you serious? Are you serious? No, we're not doing this. That lasted a whole year fighting over chairs. So hearing her say, $1 and 2 family members, you need an estate plan, got that reality check with millions, and then having, something on a smaller scale coming down to, somebody having a checking account with, a couple $1,000s in it, but no burial policy. and having the ex-wife on the account. And the ex-wife was like, well, you know, that's my money. I don't have to pay for the funeral.
So wait, go back. When you say burial policy, is that separate than a regular like insurance policy?
Yeah. So you can prepay for your burial. It's usually cheaper. You can plan your funeral before you die. If you don't want cousin Poopy getting up talking about the time y'all was at Thanksgiving dinner on the corner turning tricks, you might want to plan your funeral so you can be like, cousin Poopy can't get up there and say nothing.
So basically, estate planning encompasses not just what we think of as tangible, like money and houses, but just your overall, like, whatever. If you, like you said, you owned a special chair, like all of those things are things that you can do in estate planning. So like
So Vanessa, like, what do I need to do to, like, I feel like most of us think we can't afford life insurance other than what your job affords you, which ends in many cases when you leave that job. Like, how could most of us afford life insurance? Because that's kind of why we don't get it sometimes.
This is one of my favorite subjects ever. I mean, I started in the insurance agency right after undergrad. So I bought my first policy. I was probably 22 years old. So by the time I moved to Maryland and bought my house, I had cash value already in that policy. So the policy is a permanent policy I chose because I was obviously educated by insurance agents because I was in an insurance company. And it was universal life policy, which is it's a special type of policy that allows flexibility for payments. So throughout my life, I still have it. And I'm a whole lot older with 3 children, but I bought it. The value of it, the initial face value was $100,000. So what 22-year-old is thinking about a $100,000 policy? But the premium at the time, it may have been $40 a month. I mean, I'm old, y'all, so it's been a long time. But with a universal life policy, when I started my agency, when my, building my business, I didn't have a lot of cash. That policy, you can fluctuate payments. So it's tricky. You got to stay in touch with your insurance agent, but I bought it very young. By the time I bought my house, and I bought my house probably at like 29, and so in 7 years, it had a little bit of cash value in it, and that went against my assets to buy my home. And so I think people need to think, if you're younger, to buy it while you're younger and healthy, and can afford it. So that $30, $40 a month, you're not thinking about it. So you can start at any point. And I believe that there's different phases of life where you need different types of insurance. So we talked about, the assets that we have, and they generate and fluctuate again over time. My favorite insurance story and estate planning story is actually my mom. She died young, and she worked for the city of New York. She didn't make a ton of money in her job. She started her career later, and she never owned a home, but because she maximized the benefits on her job, being a city, which is a government employee, her daughter made sure she maximized every benefit through the union, everything they had. And of course, she bought the policy for me to help me win the trip to Hawaii. So when she died, she was able to leave a legacy for me, my 2 siblings, my child, and my nephew. But I'm talking about maybe 50 grand each. So you're talking about, she probably barely made 50 grand, in her annual salary, but because she maximized every benefit, she was able to leave this type of legacy through life insurance on the job and outside of the job.
And so look, y'all, Vanessa won't tell you this, but Vanessa's rich in real life. Like, I take financial advice from her because she actually got money.
I'm just saying, but it's really maximizing every benefit that you have. I mean, when I was in DC as a State Farm agent is when I realized the people, which is why I started my consulting company, because I was selling, but I spent so much time educating. And that's when I was with the Urban League and doing insurance, seminar sales. And I was like, my people are not getting this. Like, they need more. Yeah, so I mean, I'm going to stop there. We continue the conversation because you see, I could talk about this all day, and there's so many areas of why life insurance is beneficial for many stages of life, and regardless of your income or assets that you have.
Mm-hmm. So Dr. T, when as Ashley had mentioned, as Vanessa had mentioned, just the fighting or people not having the information, how, we know that this can relate in the mental health way, because it's like there's an overwhelm, you feel stressed. Like, what's some of your experience been when you've seen people, or maybe even your personal experience?
Yeah, well, of course, we all have a personal story. I go with Ashley's story. My great-grandmother passed away when I was 19, so I was blessed to know my great-grandmother, but she was poor. She grew up and lived on a farm, worked, the land, and when she passed away, she was in a senior citizen building. She had nothing. We were paying the rent, we meaning the grown-ups, because I was only 19. But when she passed away, every cousin, people I had not ever even met, were up in her apartment. She wanted me to have this scarf. I'm like, Granny doesn't have anything. What are you people arguing over? But they were in there going to blows, and I have distant cousins that still don't speak to this day, because that should have been my scarf, and you took it out of Granny's apartment before I got a chance to go up there. So these stories that these ladies are telling are very real, and every family has them. I think.
What keeps us from not getting it? Because we don't even want to talk about.
Well, I was about to say, Star, is that we don't want to talk about death. We don't want to talk about end of life. We don't want to talk about what happens when we're gone. And so we don't have these conversations. They actually don't have to be that difficult. And most of the time, people feel relieved. When I talk to my parents about planning their lives after they leave and what they want, they were like, well, I'm glad you asked, because I don't want this and I don't want that. But they didn't initiate the conversation with me, right? So I found out both my parents wanted to be cremated. Now, my dad, I knew he wanted to be cremated, but my mother, that shocked me, right? So I'm thinking, me and my sister talk about it all the time. My brother's like, whatever y'all say is gonna be the way it goes. But me and my sister like, we're gonna have to plan this big old funeral for mommy. She's gonna want this, she's gonna want that. She was like, I don't want that. She was like, I just want, and my parents, again, they have very little. They have what they need. But I know they haven't done, I just talked to my mom recently because her father passed away when I graduated from college. So maybe I was 20, and it was probably 20 years before she took the house out of his name and put the house in her name. And I said, Mom, if something happens to you, there is nothing that we're gonna be able to do, because granddaddy's been dead for 30 years, and then you pass away, it's not even in my dad's name. Like, you have to take care of these things. So some of it is, we don't wanna deal with those uncomfortable feelings. We don't wanna look at our own mortality. We don't wanna make other people uncomfortable. And so it's all of those things that make us run away from these difficult conversations or easy conversations. And then once you start having the conversations, then you realize you need experts like Vanessa and Ashley, because we don't know anything about insurance, because most of the time the generation before us didn't have an opportunity to have things like that. So,
Ashley, can you talk about, because that happened, what you say, Dr. T, about your mother's property, that happened to my family in DC. My mother had her father's property, and she passed 4 years ago, and he had passed 25, 30 years prior, and she had property that was still in his name, and it was like a 2-year, 3-year process to finally get it put in our names. It was hell. And people tried to buy the property during that process.
So that's called heirs property. It's huge. Again, here in the South, lots of heirs property. I do that work. Sometimes I do it pro bono just because it's hard tracing. So we have Big Mama's house. It's always been Big Mama's house. Big Mama been gone 60 years. Some of us living in the house never knew Big Mama, but it's Big Mama's house. And you just know you pay the bills. A lot of times that's how our community loses our wealth, because we didn't transfer the property correctly and it became heirs property and somebody forgot to pay the taxes. Here, taxes, if you don't pay the taxes after 3 years, it goes to the Commissioner of State Lands. It's sold for the taxes owed. I'll use my family, for example. So my grandmother's house is in a historic neighborhood. The house is tiny. it's beat up, run down, but it's worth, $400,000 because it's downtown, historic, and it's a corner lot, almost an acre in the middle of a city, small city, but still in the middle of a city. And we lost the driveway by a complete accident.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, complete accident. And we had to buy it back.
I mean, if I can jump in, I hear these stories because of the work that I'm in happening all over the country. To go back to Tanya, in my book, because Star told me to bring it, I don't know if you can see it. I do have on page 50, what page? 76. I have a subject called Courageous Conversations. So to Tanya's point, the conversations are uncomfortable. Sometimes it's our culture. Some cultures believe in, they're superstitious to talk about death because then someone will die. Some people are afraid, the scarcity mentality. If we start talking about property, people are going to be gunning for it. The easiest way is to have the conversation. The conversation won't be easy, but it'll help later on. And it's actually talking about to lay out the coats, because my aunt died, the fur coats, that's what they wanted in the dishes, and all of these things when she died. And she had a will, and this is my story of when you don't need life insurance, because she was widowed, she had no children of her own, she owned a house in Queens, she also had a good government job, so she had all the benefits. She had a will, she left money to all of us, to her grand nieces and nephews. But the things in the house, she didn't itemize every last one. And so that conflict came in. But she didn't have life insurance because she had money in the bank, and she had my uncle as a signer on the account, so he could pay the final expenses. But it did get sticky when it came time to continue to pay the property tax until the house was sold. So she could have benefited a little bit, but she didn't. It was tight, but they were able to manage it. But this other issue of not having these conversations, not knowing how to designate the next right of ownership. My biggest example, I worked the Hurricane Katrina catastrophe, and it was a whole community of big mama houses. And they were wiped away. So finding the lot, the plot, and generations of people who didn't put their property in the next person's name, could you imagine? I just got a call last month in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where the properties are multi-million dollars. Same thing happened. Husband and wife get married. Wife owns the house. Husband doesn't own the house, but he gets married. They're married for 20 years. She dies, never puts the house in his name. Her children are all deceased now. His children are alive. His children live in California. The California woman calls me because now the investors are coming in and they're looking up these rights of ownership, and they're searching it, and they have to contact everybody who could possibly have a right. So now that's going to be a several-year process of fighting for it. So we have to have these conversations while we're young or younger or healthy, no matter how uncomfortable it is, and we have to keep having the conversations.
And a lot of times the fights are expensive because, I want to be paid. I went to law school, I owe Sally Mae a whole bunch of money, and I don't necessarily want to give it to her, but the law says I have to. So attorneys are charging their fees. So, it's cheap. I always tell people it's cheaper to estate plan than it is to go to probate. Our statute says that I can get up to 5% of the value of your estate. So 100, let's say your estate has nothing but $3,000 and a house that's worth $160,000. I'm going to make $6,000 probating that estate. I get paid first before anybody else gets paid.
I have a friend whose mom had that situation and took them out property down south. She was a judge, so she was a lawyer and a judge, but she had the properties. They had so much property in this rural part of Virginia that one generation had a will, the next generation didn't. So her generation is their time. She said there were 60 some odd people who had rights between the children and grandchildren. Remember, back then there were bigger families. There were over 60 people who had rights, and it cost her $150,000 to settle it. So, yeah.
So then, Ashley, when can you, for people who are saying, okay, this is insightful information, what really, as an estate attorney, will you do? Like, I'm coming to you, I don't know anything. What is it your job to do in terms of planning my estate? And what is it that I need to know or that I need to have?
So I'm going to ask some basic information, some background information. Are you married? Do you have children? What are your goals? Do you want to leave things for your kids? Do you want to disinherit your kids, live your best life, until, you're done? Different people have different goals. So if you have, let's take you, for example, you want to leave stuff to your kids, but you also want to balance that with, you want to be in control. I'd probably advise doing a revocable trust. So that avoids probate. It's more expensive on the front end, but it's less expensive and it's easier to manage when you do pass away. So your trust is created. We funded it with actually putting your assets in it, assets such as your house, bank accounts, life insurance policies, that beach house in in Greece, whatever.
So when you say revocable trust, it would basically, and you say control, like for my kids, it would be a matter of, I would be able to set up the terms for how and when they will receive those things.
So revocable means that it can, for the most part, be changed without jumping through quite a few hoops. It also means that you're still technically the owner of the assets that are in the trust.
And that's why I'm still living.
Right, while you're living and not incapacitated, yes.
Cool. So then Vanessa, to you in terms of insurance, like I have this question, I'm probably going to call you because, I really want to get insurance outside of some of the job and other things I have. What are some things that we need to be looking at in terms of outside job insurance?
Well, if you if you're employed with an employer, you would go to a life insurance agent, and there are different. I was a State Farm agent. There's New York Life. There's MetLife. I mean, there are tons of life insurance companies, and then they would do an assessment similar to what Ashley would do, is to get an idea of where you are in life in this moment and what you need to cover in the result of your death. Because life insurance is designed to cover your income and or create an estate, so it can cover if you want to fund your children's education. If you die, you can cover it that way. If you want to pay off the home if you died, you can cover it through life insurance. You can just leave a legacy through life insurance. You could, if you own a business, you could cover your business. Say you build a business and now you build a team, you got a team up, but if something happens to you or if you have a partner, the business will dissolve. You could have life insurance to cover your partner or yourself, because it's called like key person insurance or business insurance. So you want to make sure the business stays afloat, but it may take 6 months to a year to replace that person to keep the business going or to pay off the expenses. So if you are, married or cohabitating and you have children and they're going to depend on either person's income or both, you would have policies that would cover those incomes for a certain period of time. So my husband and I got married. Again, I already came in with my 100,000, and but then we had 3 children, which I didn't plan, and so now we have these 3 children that we have to get them through at least through college. So now we have 20 years. So I added a term policy, a 20-year term. So if something happens to me before they're 20 years old, my husband will be able to get the money to be able to either take care of them, pay for their college education. We've tried to avoid the 2-income trap, but we live in New York City, so sometimes we need every dollar of both of our incomes. So the life insurance is important, and he did the same. He actually got a little bit more. So if something happens to him, I'll have income to be able to take care of these children. So there are multiple ways that you can use life insurance through your life to cover those expenses, but we also both have permanent policies. So my universal life policy that I bought at 22 years old, it's gonna take me till I die. If I live to 101, I'll still have it as long as I'm funding it properly. He also has a permanent policy that will carry him all the way through. And thank God, because he ended up having a triple bypass at 53 years old. So now getting life insurance for him would be nearly impossible or extremely expensive. So there are multiple ways depending on your life cycle and where you are in your financial life cycle.
So Dr. T, we talking about assets after death, but I had the experience with my mother being sick for so long, like, the palliative care piece, which is also very, very expensive. And if you ain't got no money, you ain't getting no care because you can't stay in the hospital just because you're sick. You got to be curable or you got to go. So like we got stuck in a situation where we almost got stuck, but she, I don't want to say unfortunately, but she passed away like literally the day they were supposed to transport her to hospice, which is not free, which hospice is not free. It is expensive, especially if you have something. Like, can you talk through trying to have those kind of conversations, especially many of us have family that is like parents that are already sick or whatnot. That's the situation I'm in right now with my dad, and just trying to figure out his wishes even before he dies and have that conversation. It's been very difficult.
Well, that's a great point to bring up, Star, because it's very difficult to have any kind of intelligent conversation when you're emotionally stressed. So we know there's an inverse relationship. The more stressed you get, the less intelligent you get, right? And so the decisions that you might normally be able to make quickly and easily, bounce information off of each other, agree to disagree, but come to a consensus. When emotions are high, those conversations are like nearly impossible. And then you have the pressure and the stress of, as you said, the doctors or the home care facility, and you're trying to make financial decisions, you're trying to make healthcare decisions, you're trying to make emotional decisions, and it's extremely overwhelming. It can be damaging to the individual, it can be damaging to relationships, and it can be damaging to families. And so again, this kind of conversation that we're having is a reminder to people to begin to have those conversations now. In the healthcare space, every hospital and every doctor's office has a template for every decision you could possibly need to make around your healthcare, which then ties you and your family to start to connect that to, well, how are we going to pay for this, right? If this is what she wants, how are we going to pay for this? And so your healthcare setting isn't going to do estate planning for you, but it is a great place to jump off with the conversations. And then, as you said, Star, a lot of times we get deceived into thinking that things are going to be available to us, but things are available to those who have the money to pay for them. That's the world that we live in. And so while your Medicare may cover some limited services, it's not going to cover what you would desire for your family member or what they would desire for themselves. And so having those conversations, as emotionally challenging as they can be, it's much easier to do it before you need to than later on. As I say, I'll use my brother and sister. My sister and I pretty much agree on things, and my brother's like, I'm gonna just let y'all decide. Well, that's what he says today, but he's a mama's boy, right? And so if something happens to my mama, I don't know if he's actually gonna be the calm, cool, collected person that he is today. And I don't want or expect or need him to be, because we all are going to grieve in different ways. And grieving starts sometimes long before the person actually passes away. When we start to experience them differently, we may have to become a caretaker for a family member. All of these things will impact our emotions and our decision making. So if we haven't had these conversations, it gets increasingly difficult as the stakes are higher, and that's when the conversations are most important. So these kind of things, in terms of making sure we've done this work, had these conversations, even if you think you have nothing, I'm telling you, I just remember, my granny, God rest her, soul, there were people fighting over scarves. I mean, and these scarves probably cost a nickel, right? She was a great, garage sale person. So I don't know if she owned anything that didn't come from a garage sale, but people were literally going to blows, grown women in rural Michigan going to blows over 5-cent scarves. And
That
so
must have been special. She must have been so special. Yes.
They will
They loved her.
who gets to make the healthcare decision. That's also a part of the estate plan that we do. Choosing the person or persons to make those decisions. at end of life, doing the living will? Do you want extraordinary care provided? Do you just want pain relief? Do you want artificial food and water withheld? Do you want hospice? What all of those things we do. I'm also an elder law attorney. Do you planning to pay for long-term care, whether that be in your home, in a facility, or in hospice? So that goes along with asset protection. I know I keep throwing all these terms out, but estate planning encompasses lots of things. I also do special needs planning. So if you have kids, or if you've inherited a sibling who has special needs, there are programs galore that you probably don't know they qualify for, but have asset or income limits. We help you navigate all of that.
Because like we ended up in a situation where if people, you could do the planning, and my mom had a pretty decent plan, short of like we realized that she had assets she didn't know, she wasn't aware of, or wasn't at least communicating to us. But then it was like, well, what happens is you end up, one person ends up taking care of mom or dad or both for years, and then the distribution in the estate or per the original will, it may seem unfair to somebody because they're like, well, I put my life on hold for 5, 10 years while they progressively got worse. And now my siblings who don't even live here, who show up once a year to, do the, hey mom, hey dad, those types of things, they're hard to have. But like I would say with my family, I pissed off a lot of people, but I had it anyway, because like one of the things, like when my mother got sick and my father ended up getting sick 6 months after my mother died, he got the same cancer. And I was like, well, I don't care who's mad. we're gonna go to the attorney, and my parents had wills, but wills can get contested, and wills are not surefire things. We're gonna put people's names on property. Because you both are in yourself. At the time my mother was passing, she's passing, she knows she's dying, and my father was in stage 3 of the same cancer. So we were kind of like, I know where this is possibly going, and it really upset my brother. Like he kind of, the old school was like, well, where you want mom and dad to die? And I understand it. I wasn't mad at him, but we did like have a falling out for a minute, because of he perceived me being like, no, we got to be protected because it's just the 2 of us. And my parents had a sizable estate, or have, like there's people that's going to come after us that we're not even, and sure enough, people came after us. But like for a minute, my brother took it as, oh, you're taking care of mom and dad because you're looking at what like as a grab. So how do you navigate that piece of it? Because I know we're like, let's have the conversation early, but sometimes it don't matter when you had a conversation. It's like, that's just, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not going to be.
So Dr. T, how do you, like what Star is saying, like when in terms of having that conversation and how her brother said, oh, you just want them to die. When I tried to have that conversation with my mother, she said the same thing. Oh, well, don't worry. I have you listed. And so it's like, okay. So in terms of that, how can we empathize in terms of dealing with that grief, or how do we approach that conversation? Because we all look at death very differently. Like, my father raised me to really see death as a part of life. He'll talk about it. He honestly doesn't care. You die, you come and you go. It's like, it don't even move him. So it's hard for me sometimes because of how he was and the way he looked at it to have those conversations with other people. So what's some ways that we could do that?
A lot of times I send them a bill. I send them 2 bills. I send them a bill. Here is if you come to me today, right now, this bill is, $3,000. Here's the bill that if you don't come to me and you need me, after you're sick, this bill's $30,000. Which one do you want to pay?
Absolutely. So Dr. T, what would you say from a mental health standpoint?
I think that first of all, we just have to acknowledge that these are tricky conversations to have. And so if you're going to try to do it yourself, that's one approach, is to lay some ground rules. How do I let you know if I'm upset by something you said? Do I raise my hand? Do we use a talking stick where whoever has the talking stick can say their piece, and then, or do we take notes and pass it back? So lay the ground rules about how to have this difficult conversation. Break it up into multiple conversations. This conversation is going to be about property. This conversation is going to be about clothing. This conversation is going to be about how we're going to deal with Auntie so-and-so's kids, because we know they a hot mess and they coming to the funeral, right? So you can break it up in different ways. You can try to facilitate yourselves. If you have a family member that you trust, you could ask them to also help you, but then you get into that, well, they might be then knowing what we got. And so,
or taking sides, because the other thing, you know, and Dr. T, I need you guys speak on this, because a lot of times the two people or the three people that, like, you got your siblings, me and my brother could have probably navigated much easier, because neither one of us are really like, you know, we both like, we good. So, but then you got spouses, you got other family members that are like on each side, you know, doing the whisper thing.
You could also hire a financial coach like myself, which is part of the work that I do to mediate those conversations.
Depending on the conversation, I was going to say you may want to go to a family therapist to have a few sessions. Now, I'm not saying just sign up and you're in there for a year talking about how much I love mama more than you. No, not that. But how do we learn to have difficult conversations? Because they're going to be a series of conversations that come up, and you might need some tools to learn to talk to each other to help you facilitate kind of those conversations. You can definitely get a lawyer, but it's going to cost you, right? An hourly rate. Like, there's different things that you can do. So it's like, which professional is the cheapest? I don't know. But which one is going to impart you with the skills to try to move forward in future conversations, you know, is one way to think about it. And just remember that the more emotionally charged you are, the more stupid you get. And so this is something that's going to take time. If you do it early enough, you have time to take a break, right? And say, look, we need to come back to this next week. We're both getting upset, you know, blah, blah. Here's the, you know, this is where we got today. Boom, 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 boom. If it's happening in the middle of a death or a health crisis, you don't always have that time. And so again, to give yourself time to process all the emotions that you're having, to try to work through the conversations with your loved ones, the earlier you do it, the better. And document. So we had this conversation, and this is what we agreed on, and this is what we're going to do. And then next time you come to the conversation, sure enough, somebody's going to say, we never said that. Well, we actually did. Here's where we wrote it down, right? And that can, because then you're going to spend the second conversation correcting the first conversation if you didn't write it down, right? Because we just get stupid when our brains can only really, if we're emotionally charged, our brains are not doing all that they need to do. You're in fight or flight mode, right? And so it's critical to learn the skills. I mean, it's important for life, but it's really important in these kind of conversations to have the tools. If you can't facilitate yourself, then get a neutral party, probably outside the family, to help you facilitate the conversations until you gain that skill or that muscle is built, you know, strong enough. But the services that these ladies offer and other people in their field is invaluable. And we all have stories of either in our family or people that we know that lost wealth that will affect our families for generations to come because we didn't do these things. And if we want to move forward, we have to start doing this. As difficult as it is, as much as we don't want to face that Big Mama's going to leave us, we have to have these conversations.
And the tip I give people talking to seniors, because those are great tips when you're having the intra-family conversations, but when we're talking about having that going to Big Mama or Big Papa or Mommy and Daddy, to empower them and knowing that doing this keeps them in power. You know, they get, because sometimes, you know, they even if they feel like, you know, uncomfortable about it, they took the time and invested into their family in this way, this home, these things, and helping them understand that this is continuing on their legacy. And again, it may take a series of conversations even with them, but start early and help them see it as a place of power by putting these things on paper, starting to document it. I also advise people in a technology age to have what I call like a family binder, and it could be electronic binder, but start to document what you own in the family. Have these courageous conversations all along. Make it a habit of talking about money, starting young with your children, your siblings, your aunties and uncles, your nieces and nephews, depending on your family dynamics. Start having conversations about money. Make it more normal. Make it a part of holidays. Make it a part of Sunday dinner, where we start to talk about it and we start to document it, because the other thing is loss of documents. I had an uncle who didn't have any children. He had a great job all his career, had a stroke, and then was in a long-term care facility and could not talk. He was illiterate. He was a functioning illiterate. We did not know anything about where he couldn't write it. He couldn't say it. My aunt had the policy on him, thank God, but the long-term care facility took all of his benefits, like you said, from his employer. To this day, we have no idea. Like, we went to the state and tried to see if there were any other policies that were out there, but if he would have documented it and shared it with us before he had this stroke, we would have been in a better position. So keep trying to have these conversations with all of your family members, as many as in your reach and your connection, about money often, to try to break some of those stereotypes, and not to have, like Dr. T said, have the conversations when there's an emergency.
So as we close out, we have to close out, you guys, because we got another guest coming today. But we're gonna go around, and Vanessa, if you could just speak on just any financial tips that you feel like someone's listening, they need to know this.
I think I'm going to close with that. I'm going to share my book, Achieve Financial Victory, 7 Steps to Win with Your Money. It takes us through all of this from a financial coaching perspective. We have to talk about money. We have to deal with it. I don't care if you have a little or a lot or somewhere in between. We have to talk about money. We have to talk about money. We have to talk about money. So you can find me, VanessaLindley.com, also on social media. Talk about money. It's a good thing.
Thank you. Ashley, what's some last tips that you would leave and what you would say closing out that you feel like people need to know?
Just closing out, I'd say make sure you choose a competent professional. And if you can't communicate with your family for whatever reason or another, choose a professional. You can document your plans with your financial advisor or your attorney, but make sure they're competent. Just because they're an attorney or a financial advisor doesn't necessarily mean that they are equipped to handle the types of issues that you have.
Is there something you would say that someone needs to look out for to make sure that they're competent?
Oh, absolutely. If you're doing estate planning, make sure they're an estate planning attorney. The majority of their practice is estate planning. There are general practices out here that may do estate planning, but if, not knocking them, but if you have, some specific things that you want to do, look for an estate planning attorney. There's an estate planning council. There's the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. There's lots of academies where you have to meet certain requirements to be a member, and you can find an attorney there.
Thank you. Dr. T, any last words you would say?
I just want to remind each and every one to love one another, that in these difficult times, it's hard to have these conversations. We always talk about grace and compassion. And so this is definitely a time for that. But one way to make sure that these conversations are easier is to have them now. So I guess my challenge for this week would be to find one person in your family, either a sibling, a parent, an older aunt or uncle, and ask them if they've had this kind of conversation with anyone and would they be willing to start that conversation. Practice with someone you're comfortable with, and maybe where the stakes are lower. So an aunt or uncle where you're not going to be the primary beneficiary, and then you can then model for your family and bring it on closer to home.
Star, what say you?
I would say, you know, you gotta document everything. The biggest thing I know when my mother's passing 4 years ago, for us was one, I think the biggest thing is get an attorney, get a lawyer, get you your estate attorney, and also get you a tax practitioner that can work with the attorney, because a really good estate planner or estate attorney works in tandem with your tax advisor, because there are tax ramifications depending on how you set things up, that and one of the biggest things our financial advisor in our family has always said, and our tax man as well, is like, you know what, there's a time to start transferring wealth, and that's a hard conversation, but Black people by and large don't start transferring wealth until after a person has expired, and that is the number one way that we lose wealth and that we incur tax liabilities that that can wipe out anything that is left behind. And then the last thing is to start the conversation on palliative care, because you're just now starting to hear about palliative care, but people are living longer with really terminal and serious diseases and illnesses. And what that means is, a nurse told me this when my mother was at Hopkins. She was at Johns Hopkins for 5-6 months, and she said, it's really expensive to die in America. And I'm like, what's she talking about? And then I'm like, oh, and my mother had probably, like, I really want to say, like, probably $8 million worth of care in that window of 6 months, and thank God she had really great insurance and my dad's insurance as well. But like, have all those conversations. But my biggest thing is start the transfer of wealth prior to a person expiring. And that can mean like, hey, my name and my dad's name, or my name and my mom's name are on, everybody's already got their names on things, so that when they pass, there's not this, just because there's a will doesn't mean we're not going to have to go through probate and all those other, and the will might not be contested. So
those are great points. I didn't even think about, like, from a tax ramification. So, I guess I could only say, I'm in the millennial generation. So there's some things that, I don't know, to be honest, to be vulnerable. And I think I would speak to that generation in saying that, ask questions. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say that you don't know. It's okay to get the information. Although I have a good job, I'm do pretty well, but there's some things that I want to be able to do and to leave to my kids, and just in my marriage. And so these are conversations, as everyone has said, that we got to start having, but there are questions that we have to start asking. And if you don't know, you can always, as Dr. T said, hire these professionals to help you answer those things, and also as other guests have said, Google is your friend. There's a lot, and not to say that, because I know, Ashley, I could see you looking at me from
I was going to say the same thing.
Google attorneys.
I'm not saying Google is always right. I'm just saying it can help you, get started. So, I appreciate you all joining us today. You guys brought a wealth of knowledge, and I'm hoping, that our people really start taking these conversations seriously, because, you see all across social media about buy the block back, generational wealth. And it's like, but we never talk about implementing those things and having those conversations and actually being able to do that.
I just have to say, I do have a Facebook group called the Economic Resurrection, where I am sharing that information on how we can buy the block. I think that the last piece is for people to actually take action on it. I've had panels with real estate investors, mortgage lenders, home ownership specialists, all the resources that anyone could need to do it. We just have to do it. And so that's where the psychology comes in. So where we get past the fear, where we take the first step. So the Economic Resurrection on Facebook is a group where I am giving you what you need to buy the block, to start to build that generational wealth now. But we have to take action.
And we got to bring Ashley back, Sasha, because we got to talk about this heirs property, and then the big one, power of attorney, and how a lot of old people are losing a lot of their wealth.
Yeah, absolutely. So this conversation is so loaded. So we thank you all, and we appreciate it. Follow us, Amerikan Therapy with the K, all platforms, and we out.